actually for women in business since 2019. It began with a student from Sweden who noticed that I talked a lot about women in history and asked if I could give that lecture to a wider audience. In 2020, even during lockdown, the event I was speaking about, so part two, as it said, the Patriarchy Talk 2.0, was looking at the life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And this is the sad thing. Every year, this has become an annual tradition about some tragedy, whether it was the death of the Supreme Court Justice, RBJ, and we saw the ramifications of her death and what the Supreme Court eventually decided later on. Then we had the fall of Kabul to the Taliban. And that became the theme of the 2021 lecture for not only women in business, but also Girl Up. So I gave that lecture for Girl Up as well. And then we had the death of an Iranian woman in 2022. That sparked nationwide protests in Iran. It's tragic that I wish I could say this trend has ended, that there is no tragedy to base my talk off of. And sure enough, just as I was preparing this lecture, I got news of the death of this person you're seeing here. It's strange to do almost a digital autopsy on this person. Of course, this is her and her mom. And of course, this is her all grown up. Julia should be about to graduate this semester with a degree in engineering. This is actually a website calling for the truth for Giulio. Regeni is his name. And in my lifetime of working in Italy, I've covered the life of 3 Giulios, if you will. Giulio Regeni was a student of Middle East history who was killed in Egypt. He should have been my student. At the end, his research to Egypt ended up killing him. That was Giulio Regeni. Julia is another student who I never got to teach. And you see what these students here are doing. A thesis for the conservation of film is dedicated to not only Giulio's name, but the Giulia who just recently passed away. On Tuesday, nationwide, there was a minute of silence. So if you don't mind, if we could have a minute of silence for her, and then I'm going to ask for you to give another minute for something else. But if you don't mind, we could just have 1 minute in honor of Julia, who I dedicate this lecture to. Thank you. And it's because of her I came tonight. As you might know, this event got approved at the very last minute. I got 2 hours notice to prepare this lecture. And the reason I came is now I ask for each of us to make a minute of noise. The minute of silence was asked for by the Italian state. And we do it in her honor. Now we've given her a minute of silence. This is my minutes of noise. Okay, and this is up for each and every one of you. The protest is occurring Saturday. Since I can't be in Italy, this is my way of protesting with the people in Italy on Saturday. She was killed by her partner. her boyfriend, who failed to graduate, who was very controlling, who killed her, stabbed her about 20 times, and then left her body in a ravine. And this is one of the other events that are gonna happen, the Circo Massimo. Does anyone speak Italian? Okay, I was gonna ask if somebody who spoke Italian could read this poem for me. But I'll just read it in English. This is a poem that had been written prior to her death about other victims of femicide. So the first form of art I'm looking at is by a poet named Cáceres about the phenomena of femicide with each of the names. And so there you have the Italian, and of course it's going to be a lot more poetic in Italian, but let me read it for you. If I don't answer your calls tomorrow, Mom, if I don't tell you I won't be back for dinner, if tomorrow the taxi does not appear, maybe I'm wrapped in hotel sheets, on the street, or in a black bag. Mara, Michele, Maho, Mariano. Maybe I'm in a suitcase or lost on the beach, Emily or Shirley. Don't be afraid, Mother, if you see that I've been stabbed. Luth, Marina. Don't scream when you see that they drag me by the hair. Dear Mother, don't cry if you find out they impaled me. They will tell you that it was me, that I didn't scream enough, that it was the way I was dressed, the alcohol in my blood. They'll tell you it was right that I was alone, that my psychopath ex had reasons. And this is what's happening. This guy was a psychopath who killed her, and now they're all giving him the reasons. That I was unfaithful, that I was a whore. They will tell you that I lived, Mother, that I dared to fly very high in a world without air. I swear to you, Mother, I died fighting. I swear to you, my dear Mother, I screamed as loudly as I flew high. You'll remember me, Mom. You'll know I ruined it when you face all the women screaming my name. Because I know, Mom, you won't stop. But for goodness sake, don't tie up my sister. Don't lock up my cousins. Don't lock up your nieces. It's not your fault, Mom. It wasn't even mine. It's them. It'll always be them. Fight for your wings, those wings that cut me off. Fight for them so they can be free to fly higher than me. Fly so they can scream louder than me, so they can live without fear, Mother, just like I live. Mom, don't cry my ashes. If tomorrow it's me, if I don't come back tomorrow, Mother, destroy everything. If tomorrow it's my turn, I want to be the last. And forgive me, because this is Google Translate, and of course, a lot of the artistic poetry is lost. Hopefully at a future event, hopefully the event we're organizing next time, I'm pretty sure I'll force an Italian to come to read this properly. This was Segovia. It's the year 2019. It was before COVID. And why do I like this diorama? Women around the world are, it was in the Segovia Library. The Segovia University actually has a library, by the way. Women around the world are joined as an army to protest in the streets, carrying shotguns that shoot paralyzing rays to fight against the monster of gender inequality. Why did I like this panorama? Because it gave me a epiphany. And the epiphany was this, that throughout my teaching, I had always used patriarchy as an abstract noun. When I saw this, even though it's a fictitious creature, I had the idea that sometimes something gets lost with the word patriarchy. Because it's an abstract noun, we often use it without realizing what is the agent doing the patriarchy. For International Children's Day, which was on Monday, I gave a lecture on not looking at the agents of war, but looking at the victims instead. And the kids being the ones that are the victims. This lecture is the inverse. I want to look at the agents of a kind of war, and agents of a gendered war. And for this reason, then, I ask you to change patriarchy into a verb. Because the minute you have it as a verb, you need the noun. And the minute you start thinking, what is the noun that does the patriarchy? It helps you analyze what are the agents of patriarchy, or what are the agents of this war. So all thanks to a diorama in the Segovia Library. So when I say patriarchy is an abstract noun, well, it began with this great work by Gerda Lerner. And here's now the next piece of art we're looking at. It is a Sumerian wall relief. Sumer being in what is ancient Iraq, where I hail from. And here she's arguing it's created as an institution with settled agriculture in the Mesopotamian river valleys in between the Tigris and Euphrates. A new set of institutions, a new social relationship emerged that led to the supremacy of men from that point onwards. So I'm going to take this word and start using it as a verb with patriarching, patriarched, and will patriarch. So we begin with taking art and doing a radical thing with it, using it to convey abstract meaning. The first time, I want you to look at this, the first time, and there's a reason why she argues, in this river valley, in this civilization, writing was born. Writing was born primarily with the purpose of keeping track of trade. But in this process of writing the abstract into clay, I want you to look at the first time a woman was ever written in history. What did primarily male scribes use to connotate women from that point onwards? And then you see, to connotate, let's say, a female slave, what did you take? The mountains, and the obvious part that's referring to a woman, and combining them. It wasn't always like this. You see, in Sumeria, transformation is happening, but before humanity had settled, before they cultivated fixed crops, and from the word cultivation, we get the word culture, hence agriculture. Before there was culture, the divine was feminine. It was a goddess, and it was universal. Throughout the world, we found Buddha figures like this. The divine was usually feminine because if in the hunting and gathering societies, we witnessed that it was women who created life, then surely the world as we knew it must have been created from a goddess. This is one of the oldest goddess Buddha figures, about 24,000 years old. And this is about the semiotics of fertility. What communicates fertility in the abstract sense? And it's amazing how old it is. It's often used as a meme. And here it is, in a museum in Vienna. The year they give it, 29,500 years. The Venus of Willendorf. That's a bit smaller than my sunglasses. Next, we go to this. Depictions of women. The burning of witches. I want you to ask yourself this. Why do I juxtapose this image here? How did we go from the celebration of the divine feminine to its demonization? That women who seemed to have control over invisible forces were to be feared and burnt alive. Usually women that often could be on the margins of society. The so-called witch burnings, the witch craze. Not only absolutely a part of history, and then what do we see here? What this person is doing is taking this past and owning it. One of the best Halloween costumes ever. Does anyone know what this is? This is a skull. What is a skull? Here's another one. A scold is this, and this is where we get the word scolded from. If you complained about your husband, if you gossiped, a metal mask was put on you. So much so that there was a metal tip underneath your tongue. You could not speak as a punishment while this metal mask was put on your face. That was a scold. And you see why this girl is embarrassed, because she is being ostracized. Now, I want you to look at that and then look at the following. There is, and let me see if this still works. Yes, okay. Now we go from that to, in other words, okay, you might say that's medieval times. There was another contraption very similar to the skull that I'm going to show you here. But the whole point of the show is the following. Look at the inherently misogynistic tone in this TV show. The TV show is called 1,000 Ways to Die. And this was one of them. And look at the way this woman is being described.
In the 1500s, Italy was no different than today. Men and women got married, swore eternal devotion, and then cheated on each other. Today's two-timing puttana, Caterina. Her cuckold husband knew something was going on.
Caterina! Dovrai indossare questa.
So when he had to go on a long business trip, he locked up her grietto in a chastity belt. He didn't want to get VD again.
La prego, la prego.
The chastity belt would have been worn as a means by which to keep a male or female chaste. And they pretty much acted as a diaper that went around the body that protected the genital area. Also, they were designed for women. They could urinate and they could have their menstrual cycle.
With hubby away, the wife will play.
No, non posso.
But her lover found Kat's kitty was under lock. And he had a key.
Si firma.
The knife almost killed her. Time for plan B. A combination of olive oil and water allowed the wench to slide out of the chastity belt and her lover to slide right in. For the next few weeks, the cheaters went at it like conigli.
Caterina, guarda, sono ritornato.
But when her horny hubby came back,
Allora, non sei felice di vedermi?
he discovered Caterina was a little rusty.
Intatto.
Water causes metal to rust, so every time this woman slid the chastity belt on and off, she made contact with the rusty edges. After contact with this rusty belt, the C. tetani spores were able to penetrate the skin. They produced the potent toxin tetanospasmin, which ultimately led to loss of motor neuron control. She experienced muscle spasms that led to larynx contraction that ultimately led to her death.
There's a lesson here.
Dovrai indossare questa.
Whether it's the 14th century or the 21st, infidelity can get pretty messy.
Caterina, guarda, sono ritornato.
Caterina
Non sei felice?
couldn't keep her legs shut,
Intatto.
and now her mouth is forever.
Okay. Do you see now, on one level, there was past patriarchy, right? But then how is patriarchy being perpetuated? By the TV show itself. And the way Caterina was referred to as a puttana, right? Another, besides a chastity belt, another symbol of patriarchy, you might not realize, is being worn here. I want you to think where this tradition of the veil comes from. And that the tradition that we're seeing here is still prevalent in in Muslim countries. I want you to think whenever you see, let's say if you're an Orthodox Jewish woman, either you wear a veil or you wear a wig. Whenever the Virgin Mary is depicted as a good practicing Jewish woman, she too would have worn the veil. Where does this tradition come from? It comes from the ancient Mediterranean. By law, and this is one of the first law codes, it's celebrated, the law of Hammurabi. The original is in Paris. Even the Supreme Court of the US has a replica of the law of Hammurabi. This is supposed to be the beginning of the law, as we know it, with a capital L, of course, originating again in my ancestral home of ancient Iran. It was the law, you see, to wear the veil. It had nothing to do with Judeo-Christian Islamic traditions. It was an ancient Middle Eastern Mediterranean tradition. And the veil was this. The veil indicated you were the property of a male household, that you belonged to a father. And thus, if you walked on the streets, you were to be left alone. By law, a segment of society was forbidden to wear the veil. And those were maidservants and prostitutes. It was illegal if they wore the veil. If they wore the veil and were caught, they would be whipped and tarred. In other words, whipped 50 times and tar would be poured over their head. A veil indicated you are the property of a father. And then there's a certain point in a woman's life where she is transferred over to a husband. And then what did the veil indicate at that point? Now you're property of the person you've just married. You are property of the husband. And I want you now to think of this ceremony. In the case of this ceremony, right? Who walks you down the aisle? It's not the mother who gave birth to you, right? It's not the mother who brought you into this world. It's your father. And when the father walks you down the aisle, who does he hand you over to? The mother-in-law? No, you're not the property of the next mother-in-law. No, you're the property of the husband. And then what does the husband symbolically do? He lifts the veil, because you have to remember in those ancient societies, this is the first time he's seeing his wife. He's seeing that lifting the veil for the first time, and indicating a transfer of property. So that's the tradition of the veil. So we go from whether it's chastity belts, whether it's now, I want you to look here. What else did the law of Hammurabi say? What was the punishment? And again, I want you to think back to the scold we saw there. If a husband had declared, if there was a fighting, right, hated her husband, and if she was careful and was not a fault, even though her husband has been going out disparaging greatly, that woman, without incurring any blame, may take her dowry, and go off back to where? Not her mother's house, you see, it's her father's house. She's going back, the property is reverting. Now, if she was not careful and a tramp and neglected her house duties and humiliated her husband, the woman should be thrown into the water. In other words, tramp. Now, I want to jump up to the depiction of, from antiquity to the cusp of the modern era, when women fought for the right to vote, otherwise known as the suffragist movement. Now, the word suffragette is actually a pejorative term. It's a term that was meant to critique the suffragists. Nobody loves me, guess I'll be a suffragette. And from this point onwards, I want you, this is our journey on visual patriarchy. I want you to look here. The origin and development of a suffragette. At 15, a little pet. At 20, a little coquette. At 40, not married yet. At 50, a suffragette. Okay. In other words, do you see now the patriarchy that's embedded in here? At 40, you are, give me a term to describe somebody who's not married at age 40. Spinster. And at 50, I want you to see the axe in her hand. A second reference to the patriarchy. The practice of patriarchy in the visual form. This is what I want you to realize. What I would do with the suffragists. Okay, very good. At least they're using the proper term. They're not using the derogatory term, but what do they want to do? First of all, prevent her from speaking. Now, what have I juxtaposed with this image? It went back to the scold I showed you. Then I want you to look at this and see what I'm going to juxtapose next. If she was not careful, but a tramp, neglecting her house and her husband, they should throw the woman into the water. Okay. So in other words, what am I saying? From ancient Babylon to Victorian England, what has changed in terms of the mentality? That political cartoon here is referring to a woman named Mary Richardson. And what did Mary Richardson do one day? She went into the National Gallery and attacked this painting here, knowing that it would get on the front page of the newspapers. And here we are seeing it on the front page of the newspaper. That's it. She used it as propaganda of the deed. Okay. Now, remember, propaganda of the deed just really means anything, any actions you take that speaks louder than words. That's literally called propaganda of the deed. We see it in this day and age, following Mary Richardson tactics with the throwing of paint on works of art. Okay, that's propaganda of the deed in regards to the climate catastrophe we're facing. The idea was this: she had nothing against the painting. She thought the painting was beautiful. She slashed that Velázquez for this purpose, to get on the front page. Because if you look on March 11th, 1914, right? The famous Rokeby Velázquez, known as the Venus with the mirror. Look how far we came from the Venus in Vienna, the Venus of Wildendorf, to now the Venus of Velázquez. And they misspelled the name, not me. Okay, we all know how Velázquez's name is spelled. I just had to think. What happened to it? It was mutilated by militant woman suffragist Mary Richardson. She attacked the picture. The long narrow blade, similar to the instrument used by butchers. Okay. So look at this kind of how they're reporting on what they considered an act of terrorism. It's an outrage, and the museum will be closed. But what did the Times give her? The ability to release a statement why she did this. I have tried to destroy the picture of the most beautiful women in mythological history as a protest against the government for destroying Mrs. Pankhurst, who is the most beautiful character in modern history. Justice is an element of beauty as much as color and outline on canvas. Mrs. Pankhurst seeks to procure justice for womanhood. For this, she is being slowly murdered by a government of hysteria politicians. If there's an outcry against my deed, let everyone remember that such an outcry is an hypocrisy, so long as they allow the destruction of Mrs. Pankhurst and other beautiful living women. In this day and age, you just create a TikTok video, right? But back then, this is how you had information go viral. But you see, what happens a couple of months later in 1914 in this story? World War I breaks out. And now the depiction of woman is this: the man goes to fight, the woman stays home and raises the family. Look at here in the United States now, for the safety of womanhood, for the protection of childhood, for the honor of manhood, and for the liberty throughout the world. Help till it hurts. Liberty Loan Committee of Washington. Eventually, the Liberty Loan Committee, which usually subsidized war through donations from societies, war bonds. This is in the US, this is in the UK. Women of Britain say go. See here, this is the woman's job. The man goes and defends the nation. Now, this is a question. There was much more to the First World War than men fighting and women staying home. First of all, didn't women also deploy in terms of battle line nurses? There is a film called Saving Private Ryan. There is no film called Saving Nurse Ryan. Now, I want you to look at the depiction of art. Women in art. And in this case, you might not call it art, but it is art. It's just Nazi art. It's art for a different purpose. It's often called social realism. What's the role of women in German society and Nazi society? Do you see how the perfect Aryan woman, what is her job? Is to feed the future. She looks at the child, and when she's looking at the child, that child is the future. Compare it to the Soviet vision. What's the Soviet role for women? The Soviet women built the future. You see, in the direction she's looking at, she looks at the future. So these are more or less paintings that were created around the same time. One doesn't need a family to create the perfect Soviet future. In Nazi Germany, here is a woman looking at the future. Regardless, this is an example of the state doing the patriarchy, or for short, what we call state patriarchy. And state patriarchy is basically this. It's primarily men who depict women for the purpose of securing the power of men. Even here, I go to Mexico, where here we see A revolutionary Mexican woman doing what? Again, look at the direction. She's looking towards the future. Now, the thing about women in the Mexican Revolution, this is a law of revolutions. Revolutions usually can only succeed if women take part in it. You need that critical mass. But the general rule of revolutions is when women take part in revolutions, they rarely benefit from a revolution in terms of rights, publicly or domestically. And if you ask any woman in Mexico about the situation domestically, they would tell you as much. Now, just so you know, there was a whole band of Mexican female revolutionaries. So much so that George Lucas memorialized one in the form of again, now a feminist icon, General Leia Organa. Notice how even her fans call her General Organa because she was known primarily in the Star Wars franchise as, does anyone know? Primarily as Princess Leia. Now she's known as the General. Again, when we go to Maoist China, again, you see how the kind of the instrumentalization, the representation of women in communist art. The role of the women is to build the communist utopia. Now, I want you to go back to the Soviet Union and compare the American equivalent. Around the same time. Here's a Soviet woman building a Soviet society, often a bridesmaid, but never a bride. Now we're going to the advertising. What's the problem in Edna's case? She can't get a man. Why? Because she has bad breath. If only she could buy some Listerine, she could finally get married. And you see the difference. Her self-worth is defined by the ability to get a husband, as well as consuming Listerine. Now, let's look at the evolution by the time we get to World War II. In the beginning is, I give a man while I take care of the household. Will you give at least 10% of war bonds? Now what's happening? You need the empowered women to go and produce munitions. But I want you to look. This iconic image of Rosie the Riveter, who is it being produced by? The War Production Coordinating Committee. And I want you to ask yourself this. Who do you think is on this committee? Any women? No, it's going to be primarily men, number one. Men who need women to produce the munitions in wars that are primarily fought with artillery, to produce the aircraft. The thing is, this is what you're not seeing behind the poster. The minute women sign up to work in the factory, look what directions are given to the male supervisors, you see. And technically, this will be the male supervisor of our fictitious Rosie. So let's look. Pick young married women. They usually have more of a sense of responsibility than their unmarried sisters. They're less likely to be flirtatious. General experience indicates that husky girls, those who are just a little on the heavy side, are more even-tempered and efficient than their underweight sisters. Give the female employee a definite day-long schedule of duty so that they will keep busy without bothering the management for instructions every few minutes. Numerous properties say that women make excellent workers when they have their jobs cut out for them, but that they lack initiative in finding work themselves. Okay, that's Rosie. That's the reality. Who gossips so much that their careless talk costs lives? In other words, somebody working at a government-sensitive location during World War II. Do you see the assumption here? Whether it's women who are flirtatious or women who are gossipy. In other words, you can't let this woman hold secrets because if she made careless talk, you see, she might give away valuable information to spies. Oh, now look at this. Here, the woman is not a source of gossip, but the following. She may look clean, but pickups, good time girls, prostitutes, spread syphilis and gonorrhea. You can't beat the axis if you get VD. See? She may be a bag of trouble, syphilis and gonorrhea, you see. And you see what is happening here by World War II. It's the smoking woman. In red, that's a source of danger, right? Look at this. Always now with a cigarette in her mouth. The juke joint sniper. syphilis and gonorrhea, you see. And you see, what are all these women analogous to? Again, look at that. What color is she wearing? What color is her hair? And you have to understand all of this, okay? Are the semiotics, you see. The woman as a threat. Again, what color is she wearing? Venereal disease covers the earth. Learn to protect yourself now. All of these women are more or less like enemy combatants, you see. They are a threat. What has changed? Look at the following again. Here we are in the present. We're no longer in World War II. Matty and 19 others were here. HIV, AIDS, use condoms. This is a public service announcement. Let's go back to the smoking woman. It was said in 1929, by that time, only a prostitute smoked in public. Now we're getting to the realm of advertising. What changed? You see, the people who devised those propaganda posters, when the war was over, beginning of World War I, they went from designing propaganda for the state to designing propaganda for the private sector. And one of the great propagandists, his name was Edward Bernays, worked in World War I for the US government creating propaganda. And when the war was over, he opened up a private office in a place in New York called Madison Avenue. He set up to basically take propaganda from the war and make it available for the corporations. What was born was modern advertising, mass advertising. Edward Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. He basically took his uncle's psychology or psychoanalysis and adapted it to the mass market. Basically, one of his first clients was Lucky Strike. And Lucky Strike asked Bernays, how do we get more people to smoke more cigarettes? And basically, he said this, well, the problem is this, half the population not smoke in public. You want to increase profits, you have to overcome the taboo of women smoking in public. So what is born? The Torches of Liberty campaign, Torches of Freedom. He rechristened cigarettes as symbols of women empowerment. He basically hired a group of models to walk down Fifth Avenue during a parade and then stop and in synchronous moment light up a cigarette at the same time, knowing that would generate media coverage. And the glamour of that act, sure enough, attracted a good number of women to smoke. And so we have this. Like a Lucky, and you'll never miss sweets that make you fat. Now, I want you to ask this. How many products are geared towards women that play upon a woman's vulnerability? Has that changed? So the beginning, when I say patriarchy as a verb, what is patriarchy? Well, the corporation, the market, the economic goods, consumer goods. Where there's smoke, there's fire. You see this, okay? It's all about now women's empowerment, right? But now we go from that to this. Blow in her face and she'll follow you anywhere. You see the change? Or how about this? Where's the proper role of the woman now by the time we get to post-World War II society? Just one question, Mom. Can you afford not to smoke Marlboro? Now the role of the woman is to be confined to the household, to do domesticated chores. Gee, Mommy, you sure enjoy your Marlboro. Before you scold me, Mom, maybe you better light up a Marlboro. Now, compare that to this. Cigarettes are like women. The best are thin and rich. All through the product of cigarettes. We're just going to the history of cigarettes in the market, as well as the semiotics of all of this. Now, she'll want to thank you 3 times a day. Now, what is the commonality here? Is again, instead of women's empowerment, what are we seeing advertising geared for? It's the domesticated role of women. Christmas morning, she'll be happy with a Hoover. P.S. to husbands, if you want to read there. She cares about her home, you know, so if you really care about her, wouldn't it be a good idea to consider a Hoover for Christmas? Prices start at $66.95. So there we go. Give her a Hoover and you give her the best. Wife, look this ad over carefully. Circle the items you want for Christmas. Show it to your husband. If he does not go to the store immediately, cry a little. Not a lot, just a little. He'll go. He'll go. Husbands, look this over ad carefully. Pick out what your wife wants. Go buy it before she starts to cry. The chef does everything but cook. That's what wives are for. I'm giving my wife a Kenwood chef. Stacked for convenience. Thermidor. Now, I want you to go to this ad. What did it say? Often a bridesmaid, but never a bride. Let's zoom in. Edna's case was really a pathetic one. Like every woman, her primary ambition was to marry. Most of the girls of her set were married or about to be. Yet not one possessed more grace or charm or loveliness than she. And as her birthdays crept gradually towards the tragic 30 mark, marriage seemed farther from her life than ever. She was often a bridesmaid, but never a bride. Okay, so in other words, these were all just domestic goods, appliances. You went from cigarettes, now we're selling insecurity. Look at that now with the image I showed you previously with the reference to the suffragists and this advertisement. Playing on women's insecurity at a certain age, if you're not married, you have failed. What she really wanted was children. And what did she end up with? A dog. And I want you to think of often another term, the crazy cat lady that's used. And what's the problem was she wasn't taking her Listerine, so the men were avoiding her. So, where did the term spinster come from? And this goes to show you the next level of patriarchy. Patriarchy is embedded in our language. Originally, the spinster spun wool. Okay. It was an occupational term. Somebody who spun yarn. Okay. Then a woman without a husband might have had to rely on spinning as a source of income. So the term became associated with unmarried women, eventually becoming the legal way to refer to one. By 18th century, a woman still unmarried went beyond the usual age for marriage, an old maid. By the way, speaking of now the words in our language that are examples of patriarchy, do you know what the word bride means in Old English? A bride is the Old English word for a cook. In other words, when somebody congratulated you on your new bride, congrats, you got yourself a new cook.
That's crazy.
Again here now, let's look at this. This is for gum. Do you know how to kiss a girl? Then learn. Stand facing her. Do not tell her your intentions. Do not ask permission to kiss her. So on and so forth. Do not hurry. Sigh one more. If she is alliterated, Pepsin some girl, then kiss her. In other words, if her breath doesn't smell bad, then you can kiss her. How can it be tactfully told to a sensitive young wife? You see, dear, there's a grave womanly offense that's rarely discussed. So that's why Dick has been so cool to me. And what is it for? Zoonite for newer feminine hygiene. Love quiz for married folks only. Why does she spend the evenings alone? For feminine hygiene, always use Lysol. Now remember what Lysol is. It's a substance to make your breath smell better. But now what it's also saying, okay, it can also be used as a product for feminine hygiene. So now what are we selling? The harder a wife works, the cuter she looks. And why? She uses vitamins, Pep for vitamins. Now, what are we selling? And here is my argument, the continuity. That we go from an act of violence like this to the most recent femicide in Italy, which by the way is not recognized as a crime there. If your husband ever finds out you are not store testing for fresher coffee, if he discovers you still taking chances on getting flat, stale coffee, whoa, for today, there's sure and certain way for tests for freshness before you buy. Show her it's a man's world. Now, again, we're still going to the realm of domesticity, the domestic realm. Now, pay attention to the font in the following ad. It's nice to have a girl around the house. This is the semiotics. Men are better than women. Indoors, women are useful, even pleasant. On a mountain, they are something of a drag. So don't go hauling them up a cliff to show off your Drummond climbing sweaters. No need to. These pullovers look great anywhere, on the level. In other words, don't take them up the mountains, just wear those sweaters at home. So do you see the semiotics? You recognize now the font used in these retrograde advertisements. Okay. So hence 10 top tips to end rape. Don't put drugs in women's drinks. When you see a woman walking by herself, leave her alone. If you pull over to help a woman whose car has broken down, remember not to rape her. If you're in a lift and a woman gets in, don't rape her. Never creep into a woman's home through an unlocked door or window or spring out from her between parked cars or rape her. Use the buddy system. If you're not able to stop yourself from assaulting people, ask a friend to stay with you while you are in public. Don't forget, it's not sex with someone who's asleep or unconscious, it's rape. Carry a whistle. If you are worried you might assault someone by accident, you can hand it to the person you're with so they can call for help. Don't forget, honesty is the best policy. If you have every intention of having sex later on with the woman you're dating, regardless of how she feels about it, tell her directly that there's every chance you will rape her. If you don't communicate your intentions, she might take it as a sign that you did not plan to rape her and inadvertently feel safe. Number 10, don't rape her. Look at the following. At the end of the day now, we're in the present. Men's interest, women's interest. This is the market patriarchy. I haven't gone away. Men are interested in The Atlantic, The New Yorker, Discover, The Economist, Newsweek, and fitness and history. Women are interested in glamour, cosmopolitan, gossip, people, and brides. Now, when I say this kind of continuity in advertisement hasn't changed, well, let me show you the following. Produced how long ago? Okay. Close to 10 years. A good number of these advertisements. Let's watch.
I love giving blowjobs to sandwiches.
I love sacrificing my dignity for a drink.
I love sleeping with guys that don't know my name.
The pursuit of happiness, just as our forefathers wanted.
I hope when my daughter grows up that she has friends just like these.
The key to my heart? A man that smells like a vagina.
I'd sell my body for a burger. Nothing makes me hotter than watching a guy get his head blown off.
I'm only here for your entertainment.
goes great with this dish? My butt.
Obviously, my cleavage can sell anything.
When I reach into my designer handbag, you know I'm naked. This shirt looks too good for pants. Peekaboo. Like what you see?
Okay. So again, when I talk about this as a form of violence, sorry. Look at Dolce & Gabbana, Calvin Klein jeans. In terms of just the normalization of violence. I don't know what's happening for this magazine for the international lifestyle. Now let's look at the following. This is coming from the website called crack.com. This is actually produced by people who like cracked, not crack. That's something else. Crack.com sells something else. Crack.com is like a Wikipedia for satire. Becoming a donor is probably your only chance to get inside of her. This woman is supposed to look like money in Miami. No one drops them like we do. Insurance company. On buses. This ad for Mentos gum ran in 2012. The ad makes no attempt to explain the connection between gum and sexiness. It's just gum being held in front of a woman's butt. Mentos was really half-assing it here. Huh? Get it? Okay. Is this just an American phenomenon now? Look at the next following. This is in New Zealand. How do you make hearing aids sexy? To hear no evil would be a bitter shame. That's in New Zealand. This is in Canada for tinted windows. Highlighters. This is a Danish owned shop. I had a washer on sale. Yeah, topless one. They never showed the wash. Of the living company.
Yes. That was the case.
You remember that one, yeah?
Yeah.
Chupa Chups, a Spanish company. Okay. Now, I want you to think again, when I say patriarchy, right? I want you, we see it in images, right? But then I also want you to look at the following. The derogatory terms, okay? To insult somebody, right? Particularly a man. What do you say? You have no balls, or that you have a mangina, right? Do you see the words that we use, whether it's spinster, tramp from ancient Babylon, to the following? What about this? Area codes in which ludicrous claims to have hoes. To be collected. And then we look at narrative patriarchy. What do we mean by narrative patriarchy? Porn movies and Disney are responsible for the most traded human beings I know. Where the hell is my Prince Charming? Where the hell is my insatiable whore? We can't all be the princess. 21 ways to teach children harsh life lessons. My cleaning trolley. We can't all be the princess. Girls, this will be you if you don't study. Minimum wage Barbie. Deadbeat Kens sold separately. Cosmopolitans for girl. Tips to help you land a future billionaire while he still looks like this. Okay. Walt Disney princes teach men about attracting women. Be rich, charming, famous, and good-looking. Now, look at the following, what somebody did to address this. It's patriarchy embedded in our narratives.
If Cinderella were a guy, once upon a time, there was a boy named Cinderfella. He lived with his evil stepfather and ugly stepbrothers. One day, his stepfather got an invitation. But Cinderfella's ugly stepbrothers were jealous of his beauty. They didn't want Cinderfella to go, so they tore apart his suit. Cinderfella wept and wept. Suddenly, a fairy godfather appeared. He gave Cinderfella a new suit and glass loafers. When Cinderfella arrived at the ball, the princess asked him to dance. Oh no, his curfew! The next day, the princess sent her servant to search for Cinderfella. When Cinderfella tried the loafer on, it fit perfectly. So the princess married Cinderfella. And they lived happily ever...
Hi, I'm Elena Favilli.
And I'm Francesca Cavallo.
Recently, I realized that not a single story I read growing up featured a girl who took her destiny in her hands and made something on her own without the help of a prince, a brother, or a mouse. By the time girls reach elementary school, they already have less confidence than boys. Why is that? They say that if you can see it, you can be it. But what happens when you never see someone like you making the headlines? What happens when all that you see around you is movies, cartoons, books, TV shows, dominated by men?
We decided we had to do something about it.
That's why we created this book.
It's 100 stories of real women who have achieved incredible things despite all odds. Astronauts, chefs, painters, judges, tennis players, extraordinary women who have changed and are changing the course of history in every field imaginable. We call it Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls.
It's the book we wish we had when we were children.
Get it for your daughter, your niece, your friend's daughter. Every girl you know deserves to grow up thinking that she can be anything she wants.
Okay. So what is this aiming at? It's aiming at the structural dynamics in an economy that patriarchs. We're seeing who patriarchs? Advertising executives. And if anyone wants to watch a practical documentary on patriarchy and advertising, there was an entire series devoted to it called Mad Men. Who patriarchs? The people who write our stories, the people who make our narratives, the artists. Patriarch, because every depiction of a woman we've seen in this lecture had to be drawn by someone. So, this is all to set up, is there an alternative world? There is, at this exhibition at Kaiser Forum, the feminine power in art, and in creencias, in creations, yeah?
Yes, I think it's like thoughts.
Thoughts, that's it, okay. It's about to end. It's €6. If you have a Kaiser bank account, it's free. So ideally, we can have part 2 here, okay? I tried to get the campus to pay for it. They never responded to my emails. A campus life, I don't think they'll. To be honest, I was going to this humanities, but they never responded. So this might be one activity we do. I don't know when school starts for you, so we might try to do this sometimes in the next couple of weeks. This is part 2 of this story. Okay, I've just been setting up what's going on, but I want to conclude with the following. And again, we go to the semiotics. The symbol was often used as a way to refer to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. When? I'm sometimes asked, when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? I say, when there are 9. People are shocked. But there had been 9 men, and nobody's ever raised a question about that. And I began this lecture how a diorama got me to think about patriarchy in a different way. It took the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and hearing that phrase, because I would only hear that phrase upon her death. Just like I only learned that femicide is not a crime in Italy. It takes a young student to die for me to learn that. It made me then come to another conclusion. The first was that patriarchy, we have to talk about the active agents who patriarch, okay? But when she died, it made me think of this. When she died, she was talking about the future. When she died, were there 9 female Supreme Court justices? No, she was saying even in the future, you can't imagine that. Which then made me come to a conclusion that there's a temporal aspect of patriarchy. Patriarchy governs time. And when I say it governs time, let me ask every single one of you in this audience, okay? And try to think if you could come up with an equivalent. And these are the questions I came up with. Who has patriarched you in the past? Who is patriarching you in the present? And who do you anticipate patriarching you in the future? You see, patriarchy is a form of power. It's a form of control. Your ability to patriarch is a reflection on your control over a woman. And so this is the thing, when I ask this question, right, then I ask every single one of you, is there any other kind of form of power that can govern your past, present, and future? Is there any power out there that has so much power over you in your domestic life, in your public life, from your household to the minute you step out of the door? Is there anything as powerful as patriarchy? I can't think of one. From a philosophical perspective, I can't. And the thing is, on some level, every single man is responsible for this, including myself. We just patriarch on different levels. So let's go back to our little diorama that gave me this epiphany. That was the argument I was trying to make. That's that black creature, that's what's patriarchy. And that's what I end on. This is what I end on. Saying that again, don't let this end with a minute of silence. Take one person's faith and make it a minute of noise. Whether we make it a minute of noise in that museum exhibition, whether we make a minute of a noise in part 2, where we look at femicide more specifically looking at girls as we define it. Do you have any questions or thoughts or comments? So this is what it is. It's representation. We looked at the representation of women, the depictions, the projections, visualizing. And in an invisible level, with every depiction you've seen, there is an invisible form of power working upon those depictions. That's why I define this patriarchy. And everyone, there's a drawer, there's a sculptor, there's a chiseler who is perpetuating that system. Any questions or thoughts? Yes.
I have a question. Do you think
Remind me of your name.
Manuela.
Manuela, okay, thank you.
Do you think this, I feel like we're very far away from like reaching consciousness about this topic all over the world, but do you think like we've made a progress about it?
Okay, the progress goes like this. If you ask an Italian right now, they would say no. There hasn't been no progress. It's like gun crimes in the US. There is no progress with gun killings in the US. This is the case with femicide. Progress suggests a linear progression. It seems like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Yeah, that's why in terms of progress. Is there progress? Well, can an advertiser for coffee ever show somebody being beaten for not buying the right type of coffee? That's why history is important to see. You do see the progress. There has been progress made. Carl's Jr. in that 2015 ad stopped making in that video we saw, stopped making advertisements like that.
That's because more women are coming into the industry as well, right?
And they also protested. It's not coming into the industry. They raised minutes of noise, and Carl's Jr. listened. Yeah, slowly progress. Women are going into, so yes, there is progress. But I think the progress needs to be made. Patriarchy can only exist if women perpetuate it, if women allow it to happen. Yes. And like I say, if women also partake in it. And then on another level, yes, if men also remain closed-minded about this, the patriarchy will continue. And so let me make my confession. If I hadn't been hired at a job in California and more or less asked to teach a class on the history of women in the Middle East, that led me to a greater awareness of this issue. But sometimes I wonder, I doubt, to be honest, I wouldn't be giving this lecture today were I not asked to teach that class. So, I mean, that's the confession I made. I mean, my awareness had to be imposed on me. And again, at the end of the day, I'm still the oldest male in a Middle Eastern family. So that's why I say everyone patriarchs is just at what certain levels. And maybe are you aware of it? So I think every man has to realize they patriarch. And to some levels, women do patriarch.
Women too.
And be made aware of that and how much they're doing it and that they will do it.
Because women post that on each other too, unconsciously. And also on yourself. And on yourself.
Oh, that's it, on the self. Yeah, it's kind of like a self-patriarchy, a self-patriarchy, if you will.
Because we're so conditioned.
Exactly. Exactly. The conditioning of, appearance has to conform to a certain way beyond your control. And then when I say about you being patriarched in the future, the whole reason there has to be a woman in business is an indirect acknowledgement. Business is primarily male dominated, right? The whole idea that there has to be a women in business club. Is there a men in business club? No, it doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be, exactly. Let me put it this way. It's an acknowledgement that there's such a thing called the glass ceiling. And that it needs to exist because upon graduation, there's going to be patriarchy in the future. That's what I'm saying in terms of how it governs. Yeah, you will be patriarch. Absolutely. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I had a conversation like this about this with the guys in my class, and they're so aware about it.
They're so aware?
They're very aware about it, and
okay, so that's progress.
Yeah, it's progress. And they were talking about how this guy in our class goes around making out with a lot of girls in the clubs, and everyone likes oh yeah, man, like he did that. But if a girl did the same thing,
well, what do we call them? We would call them a player, right?
Yeah, but if it was a woman and she's a whore, and they made that comment,
that's just a whore, a slut.
Yeah,
a skank.
Yeah, exactly.
But a guy is a player. A guy wins if he does that. A woman does that, kisses a lot of guys. Yeah. Think of the variety of insults. In Turkish, just to give you, because I tried to show you this is a global phenomenon. In Turkish, right? A guy who would do that would be called an avcı, a hunter. In Turkish, you would be called a kaltak, surtuk, fahişe, kahpe. Two insults coming from the Turkish language, two other from the Arabic language. She might be called sarcastically a kashar, which is a form of mozzarella cheese, or a motor, a kind of boat that crosses the Bosphorus. See the variety of ways you could call a woman promiscuous. Is there a way to call a man promiscuous? You even create a hybrid word, calling him a man whore.
Yeah, in French, it's like she's dope.
Okay, exactly, because it's an
your son
inverted
of a
acknowledgement.
bitch. There's no direct insult for the man.
Yes, exactly, for promiscuity.
Yeah. Exactly. Even in Hindi, I'm from India, and the words that they use are motherfucker and sisterfucker to abuse a guy when they're still using.
And then there's also panchon.
Yeah, that's sister fucker.
Yeah, okay, see, there you go. There you go, and I heard that on the streets of Madrid.
For me, it's like this idea that like a big part of the feminine experience is like this female rage that is like silent throughout society, that you just have to feel internally, that you cannot express, but you know that like other women and other girls around you or people who experience a female experience feel it and share it, but you cannot express it because even when you do, you will be called crazy or insane, or that it doesn't make sense, or that you are imagining this because those barriers aren't created. You're simply underestimating yourself or things like that.
Yeah.
And I gave you a historical image to demonstrate that, the way Mary Richardson was depicted with the axe in her hand.
Yeah.
For votes for women, and you see that's continuity over time. Absolutely.
Everything you just said is exactly how men see feminists.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's
a
how
lot of guys. I
That-
feel.
That's the thing, because
Yeah, I love it.
feminism became man-hating, right? There's always like a movement is always labeled by one extreme individual or one individual who has a diverse opinion from the general consensus. Whereas most feminists want equality.
Exactly.
And you will have some who will be a little, I'd say, extreme.
Yeah,
not
but that's
gonna
not the
disagree.
norm.
Exactly,
That's
not the
point of the
norm.
movement.
And then you have that if you call yourself a feminist as a girl, you're considered a man hater, and that you will automatically disagree with men, that you automatically don't listen to their ideas.
It's not about them. It's not about you.
The thing is that I always like, as I am a feminist and I consider myself a feminist, but like when I start a conversation with men, they're like, oh, but like you don't want machismo, because in Spanish we call machismo like the other way, like patriarchy. But like even your word has feminist, so like you're putting yourself, like with the word you're putting yourself like above us, and they think that feminist is like making yourself above us and above men
equal,
and like they use the counter argument of like the word feminist itself, like implying that women are better.
This is the way I would say it. So this is the way I frame it. There is the feminist movement. Okay. There's a feminist movement, and I mean, never in my life have I taken part in the feminist movement, right? As far as I know, I've never joined a feminist organization. But then there's feminism as a way of seeing the world. And that for me is, after I started taking this class, I started teaching this class. I'm teaching a class through a feminist lens. And after that, there was no going back. So in other words, this is a way, if somebody tells you that, you say, no, feminism is a way of basically deciphering reality. There's feminism, the movement, and then there's feminism that makes you aware of a reality we construct. So I'll give you a very good example that me and both my sisters and I, in other words, that a feminist lens will help us understand. I used to wear a white piece of cloth where during the hot summers where my shoulders were showing, right? I would call it something. My sisters would say, stop wearing that, put a shirt over your X. What is this white piece of cloth called? Imagine a white outfit. I don't want to say the word, I want you to imagine it. A white outfit, your shoulders are showing, the chest is showing.
Wife beater.
Wife beater. See how we normalize that, right? So imagine this. I am like, God is hot. I need my wife beater. And then what does my sister say? I have guests coming over. Put a shirt over your wife beater. Do you see that? So what I say, what does feminism help me see? Is again just how normalized violence against women is, right? And not only that, the wife beater does have a cultural connotation. It's usually associated with Latino men or, you know, swarthy men who wear that and assume they beat their wives. So there you see, I'm perpetuating it, my sister's perpetuating it. So when I say I'm patriarchal, I'm saying, yes, all of us are to certain levels, and men will always be patriarchal.
Also,
You just have to be aware of it. That's the only solution. Sorry.
about like domestic violence and things like that. I feel like like progress is not linear, because we've gotten to the point where people are more aware about domestic violence, and like countries and states have definitely put out campaigns and put more work towards looking at it, and like you should know what the signs are. But then there's also like to the point where in TV shows, like in crime TV shows, they'll always look at the boyfriend as kind of a joke, but it's not really a joke. And then like getting slightly vulnerable, but as a victim of abuse, like they never look at the mental. So
very good.
I'm gonna share this to a small group. But
Well, I'm recording though. You want me to stop? Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. You don't mind? You
I
ask
don't
me.
mind.
Okay.
I'm very
But if I
open about
post
it.
it because the other people couldn't make it, you want me to stop or you want to?
Up to you. I don't really care. I'm very open about it. Okay. But so basically, I was a victim of mental abuse by my father. I'm sorry if I start crying. This is a trauma response. Yeah. And I remember my mother told me she had to go to a women's shelter, but because they said that he hadn't hit her, it didn't mean anything. So they said, pack a bag, and when he hits you, you can stay with us. And then we had to go to the police, and they said the same thing. And so because of that, I was under custody of my father for several years as well.
Which country is it?
Germany.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and so that's the thing, right? So my mom tried to fight for custody for me and my sister, even though it was very obvious that we were being mentally and emotionally abused for multiple years. But there was this thing of if there is no physical abuse, or if he has not committed a crime, there is no reason why we should give sole custody to the mother. And so because of that, he had to be in charge of parental decisions over my life for several years. But so because of that, like when I would explain it to people, they could only think of it as, but is it really as bad as like, wouldn't it be worse if he hit you?
Yeah.
But sometimes mental abuse is worse because it's completely hidden.
Exactly.
And nobody can
And you can
understand
recover
it.
from a mental wound. I mean, a physical wound. The mental ones are
I
impossible
mean,
to
to the
recover.
point, it got so bad where like, to the point where I was trying to get him to hit me because then it would be over.
Yeah, yeah.
The minute that happens, like we had a good police infrastructure, whatever. So the minute that happens, I can go and I can say, my father hit me. I can never see him again.
So you have to be hit to be free. Like
Yeah, yeah.
it is like
There has to be
disgusting,
a photo, or there has to be some sort of
It's horrible.
And
proof.
How are you supposed to record it? Like
well, there you go. So I'll give you another example. And again, in terms of kind of not linear progression, the most obvious example was COVID. When states predominantly run by men issue a lockdown order without anticipating how women might be locked in, or it doesn't have to be women, but you might be kind of locked now in a confined domestic space with somebody who is abusive or the potential to become abusive. And the one case I know of in Italy, the police said the same thing, more or less. The police said, and this is, I want you to understand, and what we'll talk about on the follow-up, Ben, that violence occurs in a triangle. The police basically said, you pretty much have to be dead on the floor before we do anything. And take a picture of it. Okay. And so imagine if that was 2020. And then this femicide just happened in 2023. So I want you to imagine a triangle, the triangle of violence, and it works like this. You have the direct violence. So whether it's a partner abusing you or your father using the language, okay, that's the form of direct violence. And this is the problem. We don't recognize language as violence. And the thing is, language as violence, you have to have the right word to describe it. Language, or the thread of it, is latent violence. You see, that's the thing. We don't talk about a stalker, somebody who's violent, but a stalker is, because primarily women will always feel the possibility or the threat of violence. It's called latent violence. This is what I call it. Okay. What the police want to see is manifest violence. And that's a mistake. We need to create a new continuum where violence doesn't have to be manifest for action to be taken. See?
the point is not
Exactly, that the point of even the possibility of latent violence has to be active. Okay, so that's violence, direct violence. Then you have this structural. The structural is this, it's the police failing to act. It's the Italian law codes not recognizing femicide as a crime. And then the next part of the triangle is the cultural. The cultural that says father knows best. The cultural that says the guy was under a lot of pressure. The cultural is he seemed like a nice guy. There must have been something else. These are all things that have been said in response to the most recent femicide in Italy. And that's how violence occurs. It occurs in that triangle. Yeah, that's the problem, is the inability to distinguish between the latent and the manifest violence is really the issue.
Do you know where he is now? Like, was
The boy got caught in Germany,
Yeah, right. And now.
and now he's being extradited. But yeah, he fled Germany. He after the crime, after the murder, he fled to Germany and was caught. It's horrible, but there's a place in Rome called the International House of Women, and I didn't show the pictures. All of you, if you don't mind, follow me on Instagram. I kind of force my students to do, but I had pictures from the International House of Women, and it shows ways women died, and I had no idea. A woman killed by her son with a hammer. Just horrific ways. And then when you see it like kind of plastered on a wall, I'll repost the story tonight. When you see it on a wall, you could detect the patterns. That was what's scary. How many men killed with a hammer, for example? And because, I mean, why is the hammer just so scary? It's just because it's an intimate act, but it has to be done over and over again. Julia was stabbed 20 times. And this is what shocks me. It's just the intimacy of it. And that is, the person didn't stop. So part of this lecture was we were looking at the cultural violence. So what I was arguing, but it was every single image I showed you, on one way, it's cultural. I mean, really, the only structural one I showed you was the law of Hammurabi. In ancient Mesopotamia, that's an example of structural violence, where the law enforcers are allowed to disproportionately inflict punishment on women. And this is the US Supreme Court. We celebrate this as the beginning of civilization, the law of Hammurabi. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. Because I come from a very also like patriarchal society.
So this is what I teach in the class. Every society is patriarchal in different ways.
Yeah,
that's the.
But for example, like in my case, like I'm gonna like say what happened, like an example, and like I don't know, like I would love you to tell me like how should I respond with like a feminist point of view. Like my mom was telling me the other day, like, oh my God, like the girl that works for like a worker, a partner at her work, like her son got into jail because like he raped a girl, but like according to the mother, like that didn't happen, and like apparently like now, so according to the mother, like justice now, even if you say like, oh yeah, he raped me, like they give validation to the victim, which I think it should be like that. But my mom was telling me like, what if he's not? Like, what if like maybe like the woman is mentally unstable or something, like, and that's the thing. And I don't know like how to explain to her, because what if also, I don't know, like my mom was saying like, what if it's the other way around? Like, what if he's the victim?
My mom has said that to me.
So how, I feel like, yes, it's true. Like I feel like most of the times, like the victim, like we need to take into like be part of like the victim's shoes, but also like in other cases where like maybe, like the victim is actually like crazy, what should we do to also not perpetuate this circle of.
Well, see, then we get to the structural. You would assume the law enforcement agencies have the way to determine this or prepare for this, or invest in this. And this is where it's also lacking. So in other words, we can't know, we're just people, right? But then, so in other words, it's a matter of the law enforcement agency, which gets to kind of the level of the structures in society that manage violence. And yeah, how do we know? Well, we hope they do a good and thorough job. And we know in a good number of cases, mistakes are made in these regards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm gonna answer that.
Can I?
Yes.
I've had this discussion with several like guys from my high school stuff. Something I've always said is when you're considering that, I as a person, I would rather by mistake, if I'm wrong, I would rather defend a liar, a woman who's accused someone of rape, than defend a person who has raped and say they didn't do it. Because there are consequences for both, but for me, one of them is worse than the other.
True.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I have 2 points just in my head. one tourist thing.
Which part of India are you from?
Delhi.
Okay, I was in Kerala not long ago, and I saw a really good film about kind of Kerala that dealt with domestic violence as well. But sorry, go ahead, please.
What film is it?
I gotta find the title, but it's a horrific subject, but it really made me laugh. About a woman who finally fights back against a domestic abuser.
No, just two thoughts that came into my head. One, on the topic of rape, people say that one thing that I've heard a lot in India, where dress properly when you're going out, because people would look at you, guys would look at you. But in my head, two thoughts would come: babies are raped, and Muslim women who are fully covered from head to toe are raped. So why do people say that what you wear?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then second, super unrelated, just sitting here, I searched up domestic violence in India, and I got two news headlines. One of the first is, it says, India might be witnessing a rise in domestic violence against women due to climate change.
Oh, that's true. That's what I'm studying. I'll tell you how. What's the connection? So here's just one example. We take for granted having a stable supply of running water. In good parts of the world, where do you have to get water? You have to go out of your home to get it. And the thing is this, I want you to imagine if it gets warmer, sources of water start drying up. That means fewer wells further from home, which just means if you're a woman who has a single, let's say, head of household who has to go fetch the water for the family, and it's crazy. I didn't realize this until I started investigating. That means you're outside of the home for longer, and just simply the odds of you being attacked and raped increase. You see, it's connections like that. You wouldn't think. Just one example. There's a good number of others, but then I had to start investigating the relationship.
They're not coming back with enough water, and then the people at home are getting angry at her.
Because there's also stress because of climate change.
So let's put it this way: with climate change, let's say if most people we have to assume in the developing world, if they're farmers, losing their livelihood due to climate change. It's not only that they've lost their livelihood.
That was another thing that said
often they'll take it out. Yeah.
Their domestic violence is increasing because of jobs loss.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then this is the other example. Let's say if you're a single head of household and your environment has been devastated by climate change, you have to migrate. And usually you migrate from the countryside to the urban centers, where you're on the margins of society and also vulnerable there. That's another example that comes to mind. And every single example I give you, I know because it's happening in Iraq, the country that's being hit hardest by climate change. And just to give you an example of what's happening in Iraq, for example. Imagine temperatures in the summer, 65 degrees Celsius, 150 degrees Fahrenheit. The hottest temperatures recorded since we've been keeping track of temperature. So yeah, that obviously means water is drying up there. People are being displaced. So that's it, but you notice that hasn't been studied much. It's not something we're taught. And that's the other thing we haven't really looked at. And this is a major gap. What I was saying on Monday, a major gap in our education. We rarely have classes on the victims of war. History of war, plenty, right? Victims of war, not so much. And here's the other thing, the connection between politics and mental health. The history of mental health, the philosophy of mental health, that verbal abuse can be a form of mental violence, if you will. Rarely is there classes that acknowledge it as such, and then where we develop policies to address that, you see.
Yeah.
Rarely there's a fusion. Mental health is usually secluded to psychology, politics, looks at what happens outside of the body, but kind of in the realms of human security. Human security had to be invented as a new term in the 90s to talk about protecting women in conflict. The thing is, human security hasn't evolved to deal with thinking of even somebody's mental health as an issue of security, as human security, mental health. I mean, really, we should be talking about kind of a sentient security. All things that are sentient should be secure. So that means humans, animals, plant life. But then when you talk about sentience, then you also think about when we talk about humans, it's not just protecting the physical body. It's also the thing that produces sentience, right? Now, we haven't had that holistic transformation in security studies yet. I mean, this is what I'm arguing needs to happen. Mental health and politics, the history of mental health and the confluence between how do you deal with issues such as violence that is mental in nature, that is not direct, that is latent. All of these things have to be addressed. Yeah.
And also, like something I just want to add up quickly. Like I feel like even men's mental health gets, o sea, como que it's in some parts a product of patriarchy.
Yeah. Well, if you're seen weak, you've seen weak if you acknowledge it or seek it.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Men's mental health. That's also absolutely.
Yeah. Like they teach boys not to cry. I mean,
Yeah.
I think
Oh, yeah, growing up. That was it. My father always told me, yeah, but boys don't cry. Yeah.
Yes.
Like it affects men and women and like people of all genders. It's just that because patriarchy is normally perpetuated by men, then it's like some people say that we consider men to be the enemy, but they're also victims in this case. It's that it's been this cycle that every person is taught.
Yeah.
That so then you have to realize your own, realize how you are using this against other people, and then maybe you can overcome it to some extent. But even if you're a victim, you are also the perpetuator.
That's why I came up with a I came up with the class. It's just called Victims of War. Where even when I was talking about Monday, I was talking about how even a child soldier who's male is in theory a victim of war, because that child soldier, to motivate them to fight, they're often told in the enemy village, take it over and you could rape any woman you want as an incentive. That's how often child soldiers are paid. Yeah, money doesn't mean much to them in a war zone, but offering them the prospects of sexual violence does motivate a child, a young boy. Yeah.
I have a question also. I feel like always in terms of like careers or like in like the general like in the economy, like when you're working, I feel like because women are the ones that kind of like carry children, they're always going to be somewhat disadvantaged in that sector. I mean, it's not really a bad thing all the time, but like just in that sector, they're always going to be disadvantaged. So do you feel like it's possible for patriarchy to really, or for the field to really be completely even? And if not, like what would you say is the best possible scenario?
Okay, so that's the thing. It's like crime or world hunger. It can't be eliminated, but you could raise awareness and call out the agents. So in that example, then let's call out the agents in this situation, it's corporations, and usually primarily male CEOs, male management, and change the way we talk about this and target those levels. Yes.
Yeah, so actually I'm pretty new to this. Not like I'm not aware of this, but I haven't been able to like, familiarize myself with this feminist thing. I just hear because of my friend just like, come sit. And so there's a lot of questions. For example, I had a feeling that maybe the fact that it's because there may actually like some women actually enjoying the status quote, is pretty, for example, I thought about maybe, okay, the war, if the news, the news header saying, okay, children and women are suffering from this. I always thought, what about the men? And for example, in the Titanic, the men and the women and then children first. What about the men? It's kind of like, oh, but if you guys are benefiting from this, I'm sorry, there's so many things going on, but it's just one point of view when I look at it. Then maybe, so what if, some of us actually enjoying, that's why it's still there. And also the club example, girls get in for free and boys has to pay. There, it just from
those few examples.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's the question. Do they outweigh the bigger systemic? The thing with let women and children first in a disaster. Even that, I would assume there's also something patriarchal. It's because the big, strong men are going to take care of this problem. Let's get the vulnerable women and men out of the way. And when the Titanic was sinking, couldn't there be a female engineer who'd help hold help deal with the puncture in the hull? Well, no, not back then. You see, that's the point. But in theory, if there was a Titanic in the 21st century, you see, there's okay, children, yes, I agree. But the fact that also, the women have to first, I would argue in and of itself is a patriarchal value.
Yeah.
They're vulnerable. Also, they have no agency.
We're saying how like women get to go to clubs for free and stuff, but that's like, why can we go for free? why can women go for free?
Yeah,
Is it
see-
not to because we're entertaining to
The
entertain
men?
men?
And a male
That's why.
manager is gonna get the
Yeah.
people paying the
Yeah.
entry fees and guys buying drinks for women. Okay, sure, a guy might buy a drink for a woman, but he wants something. Or he
Yeah.
might slip something in that drink as well, do you see? So sure, you get some benefit. Yeah, but ultimately we have to ask who benefits of this. Yeah. Oh, sorry, yes. I'm sorry, tell me your names too, by the way.
My name's Ariane.
Ariana?
Chahat. Just super random thought. The more modern term now, girl math. In my head, to me, that's like, isn't that showing women that they're dumber and don't understand
Girl
proper
math?
and
Yeah.
it's dumbed down version.
That was
or
made by
really
women.
stupid. That's what I'm saying. Like it's women influencing, like empowering
Yeah.
more patriarchy
Yeah.
and
Girl math, huh?
Girl math.
I've never heard that.
Like,
for
for example, using cash is like paying is like not spending anything. That's girl math.
It's basically like ways that
Yeah.
girls or women can like justify spending
Yeah,
money.
exactly.
There's a ton of examples of it, and now even there's like boy math. But
those-
adding to this, like it's this whole like the use of the word girl now. Like even the idea of like girl dinner. It's like when you don't have the mental capacity
That's
to
so
cope
true.
with the burden of being a woman, you revert back to being a girl, which infantilizes you.
Yeah.
And so then you do something that's
Exactly.
unhealthy or bad for you.
yeah, open a packet or just open a box of hummus and
Exactly.
eat that, and that's
Eating
girl dinner.
processed food.
My
Girl
friend
dinner.
did a girl dinner TikTok and it was like the most beautiful dinner I had seen in my life. I was like, yes, you did that so well.
Exactly. And it's like
Guys,
I just want to show you somebody who taught me very good math.
oh my god, I remember.
Yeah.
I wrote this article about my professor of astrophysics. Her name was Sally Ride.
She
the
went to
first.
space, right?
She's the first American woman in
Yeah.
space.
Wow.
I sucked at math. I still do. Really, really bad at math. I still have nightmares of high school math. And she
Wait,
made
did
it.
you study astrophysics?
I studied history, but I was about to study astrophysics
Oh.
because she made it so easy for me.
Wow.
But here's a good example of patriarchy in space, if you will. So there's just a good example. If anyone wants to read, if you ever hear the term girl math, just use this case and a professor who is really bad at math, and just use the example of Sally Ride.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, so thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay, I read quite a bit on history of feminist art, and so I had a question for you because I've been reading about female aesthetics and how, at least in like the 60s and 70s, there was a big divide because there were some feminists or some women who were saying we should have a space carved out for art made by women and about women, and then there were some saying that we shouldn't because why should we have to carve out that space, because then you're saying that all art created by women has to follow this feminine experience. I just want to know what your opinion is on that because I haven't really made a personal.
Well, again, I think it depends when and where. In Mexico, okay, let's just take Mexico for example. Whose murals are on the walls of public building? Is it Diego Rivera or Frida Kahlo, his partner? It's Diego Rivera's, right? Frida's paintings are, you see, Diego Rivera was given the power to paint the story of Mexico. Frida wasn't, right?
Yeah.
So on one level, it depends. On a structural level, okay, I'd say on one level, maybe it depends on the society. On the other level, I think it depends. I do see it. It's just like, remember that magazine that showed you men's interests, women's interests? It's, okay, so here's my answer. And the answer I give here is the meta answer I give to the final, this entire lecture, is basically, if only women's art would be treated with banality, or what women need become banal. Now, what do I mean by banal? That it just becomes so much part of everyday life that distinctions aren't made based on the social construct called gender. That, in other words, women's art and men's art would be considered so banal that they could be seamlessly integrated in a shared space, with one not overwhelming the other. So in other words, that's an aspiration. In reality, if female artists are actively excluded from most of the galleries or most of the museums, and again, think of a variety of societies where this is so, then yes, I could easily make the argument in Iraq, you should have space for women's artists because rarely do they able get to express themselves. Okay. So I think again, it depends on context, but then again, also I think, what should we strive for? And at the end of the day, my answer is if only this issue would be so banal that it wouldn't be a matter. There's just a very cute story from 1980s sitcom. So maybe I'll end with that. The 1980s sitcom was called Different Strokes, where this African-American kid was adopted by this white billionaire. He had a train set at the top of the stairs. And that day, somebody who was coming over to play with him was in a wheelchair. And the guy got so excited. Arnold is his name. He asked the girl in the wheelchair, do you want to come see my train set? And they both got excited. And he goes, yeah. And he goes, okay, let's go up the stairs. And then he came down and he goes, wait, I forgot you were in a wheelchair. And she goes, that's the kindest thing you could have ever said to me. And so I think the answer is that. When will we have a society where we could just look for a woman's art for just being art and saying based on that value, it should be included? We're not there yet, though. So we do, I mean, in this case of that girl, they would have to create a ramp for her.
Yeah,
and I think in this case, this is it. We have to make these ramps
Yeah.
into the point where it just becomes a matter that's banal.
Yeah, exactly.
Will patriarchy end? No. Well, hopefully will kind of the, representation of women, their, thought and creations become banal in our society.
Yeah.
Female astronauts become banal, female CEOs become banal. I think that's what we can hope for. All right, well, great, thank you.
So much.
My pleasure.
So incredible.
Thank you.
Okay, girls, are you okay for us?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If we can all take a photo, some sort of
Yeah, small group. Just post it on our Instagram, and if you want, like, we can also tag you.
Please, I appreciate it.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So,
I can take it. No, come.
I'm one taking it. You got that's the whole idea. Where we just
Will we take a picture of you?
we'll do a selfie later.
okay, let's do this. Okay, if you want, you can take a picture of
Let's
us
take a
first.
self-timer.
And then
Oh, that's sorry, self-timer is the answer.
Yeah,
to the
that's
problem.
It's all
Okay, should we take a self timer?
Yeah, let's do self-timer.
So let me do one with you.
Okay.
Prop it up on a bag.
Yeah.
Okay, wait. Okay, first
Oh,
the
wait,
photo of
you
us,
guys
and
come.
then.
We'll see which one.
I'm very important to get us yours.
Nope.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, 1, 2, and then we'll do the self timer. Can somebody do me a favor? Her partner is still alive, so I want to send her a picture. Sally Wright's partner is still alive, so I'm just, if we could take.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah, please. And then you send it to me.
that's so cute.
It's called Sally Wright Science. You should look it up. And it's actually take one with me. It's actually supposed to encourage women to enter. Do you know what STEM is?
Yeah.
That's also a sad fact that again it has to be something that structurally has to be
That's true.
done.
There's a whole women in STEM for now.
Yeah. Because again, so it's that kind of metaphor of you. Sometimes the ramp has to be created.
That's
Yeah. Get a pretty photo with me. Better far enough right there. Okay. Sorry. I'm serious.
No, but
I'm
I want
literally
you to
serious,
be-
so that's why.
Come on, you made the effort to come.
See, true.
Yeah, this is the first step. Okay, I think.
Okay, perfect.
Should we
should I kneel down?
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't know.
No, we're all about equity here. So no, I'm not gonna. I just want to be in the back. Just let me be.
Okay, this is good.
Oh my god, nice. Everyone sees. And girls,
so
there's
cute.
gonna be like another workshop. But
I look like my Arab
Sally is
uncle
gonna be about
in the picture.
what
I look
is the
boss.
next workshop gonna be?
No, we don't do like
Wait,
next
what's the
week.
name again?
Huh?
Your workshop.
Femicide and gender-based
Yeah,
violence.
next Wednesday. So you're more than welcome, eh?